widowed rancher bought an abandoned farm and found two Apache women living there. The rancher's life had become very quiet after his wife passed away. Her illness had lasted for years, and during that time, he had learned how to be strong for her. But after she was gone, the strength faded. The house they shared felt too big, even though it was small. Every room reminded him of her voice, her habits, and the simple moments they once shared, like drinking tea in the evening or watching the sunset from the porch. Silence followed him everywhere, and nights were the hardest. Sleep came late, and when it did, it was often broken by memories. He was a man in his early 40s, known by people around him as hardworking and quiet. He owned a small ranch that had been in his family for years. Before his wife fell sick, the ranch felt alive. There were plans, laughter, and hope. After her death, the land felt like a reminder of everything he had lost. He continued working because that was all he knew how to do, but his heart was no longer in it. Each day felt the same, and he began to feel trapped by familiarity. One afternoon, while sitting alone at the kitchen table, he realized he needed a change. Not a small one, but something big enough to pull him out of his routine. He did not want to run away from his memories, but he needed space to breathe again. That was when he started looking for land outside his usual area, somewhere quiet, somewhere untouched, somewhere that did not know his past. A few weeks later, he found a listing for an old farm. It was far from town, surrounded by dry land and low hills. The description was short and vague. The farm had been abandoned for years, according to records. The price was low, which immediately caught his attention. He drove out to see it one morning, unsure of what he expected. The road leading to the farm was rough and narrow. Dust rose behind his truck as he drove slowly, passing empty fields and broken fences. The sky was wide and clear, and the silence of the place felt different from the silence at home. This one did not feel heavy. It felt open. When he finally reached the property, he parked and stepped out, taking a long look around. The farmhouse was old, with faded paint and a roof that had seen better days. Some windows were broken, and weeds had grown tall around the entrance. The barn leaned slightly to one side, but it was still standing. The land itself looked dry but strong, like it had survived many hard years. He walked slowly, examining the structures, touching the walls, and imagining what the place might have looked like long ago. As he explored, he noticed something strange. One section of the fence had been repaired with newer wood. It did not match the rest of the fence, which was old and falling apart. At first, he thought maybe the previous owner had done some last repairs before leaving, but something about it felt recent. He brushed the thought aside, telling himself not to overthink it. Later, he met with a local man who handled land sales in the area. When the rancher mentioned the farm, the man hesitated for a moment. He said the land had been empty for a long time, and that no one wanted it because it was too far from town and hard to maintain. When asked if anyone lived there, the man shook his head but added, almost casually, that the land had a long history, and some people believed it should have been left alone. The rancher did not ask further questions. He had heard many strange stories about land over the years, and most of them meant nothing. Within a month, the papers were signed. The farm was his. On the day he officially moved some of his belongings to the new place, the sun was already high. He brought only what he needed at first: clothes, tools, food, and a few personal items. Among them was a small box containing his wife's letters and photographs. He placed the box carefully in the truck, unsure why he felt the need to bring it along, but unable to leave it behind. When he arrived, the farm greeted him with the same quiet stillness as before. He unlocked the farmhouse door and stepped inside. Dust covered most surfaces, and the air smelled old and dry. He opened windows to let light and air in, then sat on the floor for a moment, listening to the wind outside. For the first time in a long while, he did not feel overwhelmed by sadness. Instead, he felt tired in a peaceful way. Over the next few days, he began cleaning and repairing what he could. He fixed broken steps, cleared weeds, and patched holes in the walls. At night, he cooked simple meals and ate alone, but the loneliness felt softer here. He told himself that this was a fresh start, even if he did not yet know what that meant. One evening, as he walked near the barn, he noticed something else that made him stop. Near the edge of the field, the ground looked recently disturbed, as if someone had walked there often. There were faint footprints, not old enough to have been left years ago. His heart beat faster for a moment. He stood still, listening. The land was quiet, but the feeling that he was not completely alone stayed with him. He considered calling out, but the words caught in his throat. Instead, he returned to the house, telling himself it was probably nothing. Maybe animals, maybe the wind. Still, that night, he locked the door carefully, something he had not done the nights before. The next morning, he found that a bucket he had left outside was no longer where he remembered placing it. It had been moved closer to the barn. The movement was small, but it was enough to confirm his growing suspicion. Someone else was here, not openly but quietly. He felt many things at once: surprise, confusion, and a hint of fear. But there was also curiosity. Whoever it was had not caused damage or taken anything important. If anything, the farm looked slightly more cared for than before. The repaired fence now made more sense. The rancher spent the day thinking about what to do. He could report it, follow the rules, and let others handle the situation. That would be the easiest path, but something held him back. Perhaps it was his own loneliness, or perhaps it was the feeling that this land carried stories deeper than paperwork. As the sun began to set, he sat on the porch, watching the sky change colors. He remembered how his wife used to say that land remembers people, even when people forget land. At the time, he had smiled and not thought much about it. Now, those words stayed with him. He did not know who was living on the farm or why they were hiding. But he felt that this discovery was not an accident. Buying this abandoned place was supposed to be a way to escape his pain. Instead, it had opened the door to something unexpected. As night fell, the rancher remained awake, listening to the sounds of the land. Somewhere beyond the darkness, unseen eyes were likely watching him too. Neither side knew yet that their lives were about to change, tied together by a forgotten farm and the quiet choices that would follow. The rancher did not sleep much that night. Every sound felt louder than usual. The wind moving through dry grass, a loose board tapping somewhere near the barn, even his own breathing in the dark room. He lay on the old bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the signs he had noticed. The moved bucket, the footprints, the repaired fence. All of it pointed to one truth he could no longer ignore. Someone was living on the land. By morning, the fear he felt the night before had settled into calm alertness. He told himself that panic would not help. Whoever was there had not tried to harm him. They had not taken his food or damaged his things. In fact, everything suggested they were careful and quiet. That thought made him feel less afraid and more curious. After a simple breakfast, he decided to walk the land again, this time more slowly and carefully. He carried no weapon, only a water bottle and his hat. He wanted to be seen as calm, not threatening. As he walked, he paid close attention to the ground, the trees, and the old structures. Near the far edge of the property, behind a group of tall bushes, he noticed a narrow path that did not look natural. It had been made by repeated footsteps. He followed the path carefully. It led to a small, hidden shelter made from wood, cloth, and pieces of metal. It blended well with the land, almost invisible unless you were looking closely. He stopped a few steps away and cleared his throat gently, not wanting to scare anyone. "I don't want trouble," he said in a steady voice. "I just want to talk." There was a long silence. The wind moved the bushes slightly, but nothing else happened. He waited, patient and still. Then he saw movement. Two figures slowly stepped into view. They were women. One looked older, her face lined by age and experience. The other was younger, standing slightly behind the older one, her posture tense. Both watched him carefully, their eyes alert and cautious. Their clothes were simple and worn, clearly chosen for work and survival, not comfort or style. The rancher raised his hand slightly, showing he meant no harm. "I'm the one who bought this land," he said honestly. "I didn't know anyone was here." The older woman studied him for a moment before speaking. Her voice was calm but firm. She said they had been living there for years, quietly, without disturbing anyone. They had nowhere else to go. The land had once belonged to their family long ago, before it was taken and sold again and again. The rancher felt a mix of emotions. Surprise, sympathy, and uncertainty all at once. He had expected many things, but not this. He listened carefully as the women explained, speaking slowly and choosing their words with care. They did not ask for anything. They only explained their presence. The younger woman finally spoke, her voice softer. She said they tried to remain unseen because they were afraid of being forced to leave. This land was the only place where they felt safe. The rancher noticed how tightly she held her hands together, as if ready to run at any moment. He nodded, taking it all in. "I didn't come here to push anyone out," he said, "but I didn't know either. This is new to me." There was another long pause. The older woman asked what he planned to do now. The question carried weight. He could hear fear hidden beneath her calm tone. "I don't know yet," he answered honestly. "I need time to think. I won't do anything today." That simple promise seemed to ease the tension slightly. The women did not smile, but their shoulders relaxed just a little. The rancher offered them water from his bottle, placing it on a nearby rock instead of handing it directly, giving them space. The older woman nodded in thanks and picked it up after he stepped back. They did not talk much more that day. The rancher slowly walked away, giving them privacy. As he returned to the farmhouse, his mind was full. He had come here looking for peace, not responsibility. Yet here it was, standing quietly in front of him. For the rest of the day, he went about his work, but his thoughts kept returning to the women. He wondered how long they had survived alone, how many winters, how many quiet nights spent hiding. The idea that they had lived on land others called abandoned did not sit right with him anymore. That evening, he cooked a simple meal and placed extra food in a clean container. He hesitated before carrying it toward the hidden shelter. He did not want to offend them or make them feel watched, so he left the food near the barn, in a visible but respectful place, and walked away. The next morning, the container was empty and clean. It had been placed neatly beside the barn door. The small gesture meant more to him than words. It felt like the beginning of an understanding. Days passed like this. Quiet exchanges without direct contact. He would leave food or supplies. Sometimes he noticed small changes around the farm. Weeds cleared in places he had not reached yet. Tools he left out were returned carefully. The land slowly began to feel more alive, shared by unseen hands. One afternoon, the older woman approached him while he was fixing a fence. She kept a safe distance and spoke calmly. She thanked him for the food and said they did not want to take more than necessary. The rancher replied that he had more than enough and that helping did not cost him much. They spoke a little longer this time. She shared small pieces of their story. How they learned to live quietly, how they respected the land and took only what they needed. The rancher listened, feeling a growing respect for their strength. Still, there was an uneasiness beneath everything. He knew the situation could not stay hidden forever. Neighbors, officials, or developers might come someday. When that happened, choices would need to be made. For now, he chose silence and patience. At night, as he sat on the porch watching the stars, he felt something he had not felt since his wife passed away. A sense of purpose, small but real. His life was no longer only about loss. It was about responsibility, choice, and the quiet bond forming between strangers sharing the same land. The farm was no longer just a place he owned. It was a place of stories, old and new, waiting to unfold. And deep inside, the rancher knew that this unexpected meeting was only the beginning. Life on the farm slowly settled into a quiet rhythm that felt new to all of them. The rancher continued repairing the house and land during the day, while the two women remained mostly out of sight. Yet their presence was no longer a mystery or a source of fear. It had become something unspoken but understood, like a shared agreement made without formal words. Each morning the rancher woke early. He made simple food, drank his tea, and stepped outside to greet the land. The air felt lighter now. The silence was no longer empty. It carried meaning. Sometimes he noticed signs that the women had already been awake long before him. A section of soil would be freshly turned. A water channel would flow more smoothly. A broken fence post he planned to fix would already be standing straight. At first, he felt unsure how to respond. He did not want them to feel watched or judged. He also did not want to ignore their efforts. Slowly, he began leaving small notes written on paper near shared tools. Simple words: "Thank you. I noticed the fence. I appreciate the help." He did not sign his name. He felt it was not needed. One afternoon, the younger woman appeared near the field while he was working. She stood at a distance, holding a bundle of dried plants. Her posture was still cautious, but her eyes no longer showed fear. She explained that the plants could help keep insects away from crops. She placed them near the field and stepped back. The rancher thanked her. Their conversation was short, but it felt important. It was the first time they spoke without tension. After that day, she appeared more often, sometimes helping quietly, sometimes simply watching the land as if checking on an old friend. The older woman remained more reserved. When she spoke, her words were careful and thoughtful. She observed the rancher closely, not out of suspicion, but out of experience. She had learned long ago that trust was built slowly, through actions, not promises. Over time, the rancher learned things he had never known about the land. The women showed him which areas held water beneath the surface, even during dry seasons. They explained how certain plants could protect the soil and how animals moved through the area depending on the weather. This knowledge did not come from books. It came from generations of listening to the land. The rancher found himself learning again, not just about farming, but about patience, about respect, about sharing space without control. His wife had once told him that land was not owned, only cared for. At the time, he had thought it was a nice idea. Now, he understood it differently. There were moments of discomfort, too. He wondered what would happen if someone visited unexpectedly. He worried that his silence might one day hurt them all, yet he chose not to rush decisions. The women had lived with uncertainty for years. He could live with it a little longer. As weeks passed, the farm changed. Crops began to grow stronger. The barn was repaired more fully. The land, once labeled abandoned, now showed signs of steady care. Even the animals nearby seemed calmer. Birds returned. Tracks appeared near water sources. At night, the rancher often sat outside thinking. His grief had not disappeared, but it no longer felt sharp. It felt like a quiet companion rather than a heavy burden. Helping others had not replaced his loss, but it had given his days meaning again. One evening, the three of them shared a meal for the first time. It was not planned. A sudden storm had rolled in, strong and unexpected. The women had nowhere dry nearby, and the rancher saw them hesitating near the barn. Without thinking too much, he opened the house door and stepped back, allowing them to decide. They entered cautiously. The house was simple, still missing many repairs, but it was warm and dry. They sat at the table, leaving space between them. The meal was quiet. No deep conversations, just shared food and listening to rain hit the roof. That night marked a turning point. Something shifted. They were no longer only neighbors sharing land. They were people sharing time. After that, conversations became easier. Still careful, still respectful, but more open. The younger woman asked about his wife. He spoke of her gently, without pain rising in his voice. The older woman shared stories of her parents and grandparents, of how the land once looked when she was a child. The rancher began to see the farm differently. It was not just his fresh start. It was their past, present, and future woven together. He also began to understand that coexistence was not about control or charity. It was about balance. Yet beneath the calm, tension remained. A nearby road was being repaired. Strangers passed through the area more often. Each time a vehicle slowed near the property, the women disappeared into hiding. The rancher noticed and felt a growing sense of responsibility. He knew that this peaceful arrangement existed only because no one else knew, and silence, he realized, could not protect them forever. Still, for now, the days continued. The land healed, so did the people living on it, and without realizing it, the rancher had found something he did not expect when he bought the abandoned farm. Not escape, not solitude, but connection. The calm they had built did not break suddenly. It faded slowly, like a clear sky filling with thin clouds before a storm. At first, the changes were small. More vehicles passed on the nearby road. Strangers stopped to look at the land from a distance. Once a man stood near the fence for a long time, writing something on a clipboard before leaving. The rancher noticed everything, even when he tried not to. The women noticed too. The older woman became quieter again. The younger one stopped coming near the house. Tools were still returned, crops still cared for, but the shared meals ended. Fear had returned, not loudly but deeply. One afternoon, the rancher received a letter. It came from the local office, informing him that land inspections would soon begin in the area. There were plans for future development, surveys, and official visits. The words on the paper felt heavier than they should have been. He sat at the table for a long time, reading the letter again and again. That evening he walked toward the hidden shelter, holding the letter in his hand. He did not call out. He waited until the older woman stepped forward on her own. She looked at his face and seemed to understand before he spoke. "They are coming," he said quietly. "Officials. Maybe soon." She closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, there was no surprise in them, only tired acceptance. She said they had known this day would come someday. It always did. The younger woman listened silently, her hands shaking slightly. She asked what would happen to them. The rancher had no easy answer. He could not lie. He said the truth gently, that if discovered they would likely be forced to leave, that rules were rules even when they were unfair. Silence followed. The land itself seemed to hold its breath. That night the rancher could not rest. He walked the farm, step by step, thinking about his choices. He could stay quiet and protect himself. He had already lost enough in life. Or he could speak up, challenge something bigger than him, and risk losing the farm he had poured his savings and hope into. He thought of his wife, of how she had always stood up for people, even when it cost her comfort. She used to say that peace bought by ignoring pain was not real peace at all. Sitting alone in the dark, he finally understood what she meant. The next morning he drove into town. He spoke to officials, asked questions, and requested records. The answers were slow and careful. Some people dismissed him, others listened but offered little help. He learned that the land had a long, unclear history. Old claims, broken promises, missing records. It would not be easy. When he returned, he felt exhausted but determined. He told the women everything he had learned. He said he would not make decisions without them, that whatever happened next, they would face it together. The older woman looked at him closely. For the first time, she allowed herself to trust fully. She told him their full story. How her family had lived on that land for generations. How they were pushed away, one piece at a time, by papers and rules they did not understand or agree with. How returning quietly was the only way they knew to survive. As she spoke, the rancher felt anger rise, not loud or violent, but steady and strong. This was not just about a farm. It was about dignity. The days that followed were tense. Surveyors came near the land. The rancher met them openly, walking the property with them, answering questions. The women stayed hidden, hearts pounding, trusting him with their safety. At night, the rancher barely slept. He imagined worst outcomes: losing the farm, being told he had done something wrong, starting over again, older and more tired than before. But every time doubt crept in, he remembered the quiet strength of the women and the way the land had come alive under shared care. Then came the hardest moment. An official visit was scheduled. Papers would be reviewed. Decisions would be made. The rancher stood on the porch that morning, watching dust rise on the road as vehicles approached. His hands shook slightly, but his voice stayed steady when he spoke. He did not hide the truth. He spoke of the women, of the land's history, of shared care and responsibility. The conversation was long and difficult. There were arguments. There were moments when it seemed hopeless, but there were also moments of pause, of listening. Not everyone turned away. Nothing was decided that day. But something important happened. The story was no longer hidden. Silence was broken. When the vehicles finally left, the rancher felt drained. He sat on the steps, head in his hands. The women emerged slowly from hiding. No words were needed. The risk had been taken. That evening they shared a meal again. Simple food, quiet voices, no celebration, just relief that for now they were still together. The future was uncertain. The farm could still be lost. The fight was not over, but something had changed forever. The rancher was no longer a man running from loss. He was a man standing for something that mattered, and whatever came next, he knew he would not face it alone. The days after the official visit passed slowly. Nothing changed on the surface, yet everything felt different. Every sound on the road made the rancher look up. Every unfamiliar shape in the distance made the women pause. The farm still stood, the crops still grew, but uncertainty hung in the air like dust that never fully settled. The rancher decided that waiting without action would only deepen fear. He continued visiting offices, asking questions, and gathering old records. He spoke to people who had lived in the area for decades. Some remembered stories about families who once lived on that land long before it was marked and sold. Others admitted they never knew the full truth. Piece by piece, the past began to take shape. It was not easy. Many doors closed before opening even a little. Some people did not want to get involved. Others warned him to let it go and protect himself. Each warning weighed on him. He had already lost so much. Losing the farm would hurt deeply, but walking away now would hurt more. The women waited quietly, trusting him more than they had ever trusted anyone outside their family. The older woman spent long hours walking the land, touching the soil, as if reminding herself it was still there. The younger woman helped more openly now, no longer hiding as much. Fear was still present, but it no longer controlled every movement. One evening, the rancher gathered them together and spoke honestly. He told them that there was no clear victory ahead, only a chance. A chance that would require patience, paperwork, and compromise. He also told them he was willing to share ownership of the land, not just in spirit but legally if it became possible. The older woman listened carefully. When he finished, she nodded slowly. She said ownership had never been about papers to her. It was about care, memory, and responsibility. But she understood the world they lived in now. She accepted his offer not as charity but as partnership. That word changed everything. Partnership. From that moment, they stopped thinking only about survival and began thinking about the future. They discussed how the land could support all of them, how they could work together openly if allowed, how the farm could become a place of learning, not conflict. Weeks later, another meeting was held. This time, the tone was different. Records had been reviewed. Voices had been heard. No one apologized for the past, but acknowledgement was there. The land's history was no longer ignored. The solution that emerged was not perfect. It required shared agreements, legal adjustments, and strict conditions. But it allowed the women to stay. It allowed the rancher to keep the farm. It allowed the land to remain whole instead of being broken apart. When the decision was finalized, the rancher felt something release inside him. Not joy, not victory, but peace. The kind that comes from doing what feels right, even when it costs something. Life on the farm changed again, this time openly. The women no longer hid. Neighbors noticed movement in life where there had once been silence. Some were curious, some were cautious. Over time, most accepted it. The land flourished. With shared knowledge and effort, the soil grew healthier. Water was used wisely. Crops grew stronger. The farm no longer looked abandoned or new. It looked lived in, respected. The rancher found himself laughing again sometimes, surprised by the sound of it. Grief still lived inside him, but it no longer defined him. He spoke of his wife often now, not with pain but with warmth. He felt she would have approved of the path he chose. The older woman aged gracefully, proud that the land would not forget her family again. The younger woman began teaching others who visited, sharing what she had learned from both old ways and new ones. The farm became a quiet example of what could happen when people chose understanding over fear. Years later, the rancher often thought back to the day he first arrived, believing the farm was empty. He smiled at the memory. It had never been empty. It had been waiting. What began as an escape from loss became a return to purpose. What began as ownership became shared care. And what began as silence became a story worth telling. The farm was no longer abandoned, and neither were the people who called it home.